Got it.
Hey everyone, how's it going? I got Mark Koenig with me today of Altai. We met a few months back, kind of working with the company. They're based out of Oklahoma. He has a very interesting background in cannabis. So, as always, like to bring guests on the show that kind of have a very tenured history in cannabis and can provide some insight into the current day operators. Mark, so I'll let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit about how we met, and yeah, we'll get going from there.
All right. Well, my name's Mark Koenig. Thank you for pronouncing it right. There's a few ways of pronouncing it, but that's the one I prefer. So I appreciate that. I've been in cannabis for 20 years now. I'm born and raised from Huntington, Long Island, New York. I went to a Catholic school. I went to a Catholic college. And during that time, I started in finance. I was interning at JP Morgan, doing credit derivatives, just low-level data entry stuff, your basic run-of-the-mill. And then I segued into the stock brokerage business, like a lot of my peers and that were around me at the time. During that time, cannabis had a very high street value. On Wall Street, it wasn't unheard of to find ounces of cannabis for $700 an ounce. During that time, gold was only trading in the low 400s. I put in an order for a client of mine, and my partner and I looked at each other and said, we might be in the wrong business if gold is at a price greater than gold. Now, I wish I had gold stockpiled in comparison to cannabis. Things have kind of shifted over the years. However, that was our first big idea in going harder into cannabis. Cannabis had been a part of my life since very young age, too young of an age. I've actually gone and spoke to kids before about some of the adverse effects of the chemical compounds of cannabis. So I'm not advocating for younger people to be consuming underage. However, it's been a major part of my life. And so on the back of the High Times magazines, we were looking at the seeds that were for sale. Mark Emery started the Overgrow the government campaign, which was to basically flood this earth with cannabis seeds and let the plant prevail. And so we called the back of the magazine, my partner and I flew out to Canada, started a relationship with some of the Canadian growers just to learn a little bit. Back then, it was MS-DOS, AOL dial-up. There was no real open forums for cannabis cultivation. You had some of your books, your Jorge Cervantes books, but they're not very detailed. And they don't really lead the way to a super profitable cultivation SOPs or anything like that. But we did it, and we were. I would say the approach we took was different than majority of growers back 20 years ago. Coming from finance, we did dissect the plant and how to make it profitable to the furthest extent, how to squeeze the most profitability out of the plant. And so back then, 20 years ago, it was unheard of to do, I'll keep the production per square foot lingo like it is now to the side, but per light, I mean, we were doing 3-4 pounds a light. It was unheard of 20 years ago. So I started doing underground cannabis, legacy cannabis around the New York area. I eventually got caught and was arrested. Luckily, it was my first offense. So I was placed under an intensive supervision probation program, and the judge was lenient and kind enough to award me a certificate of relief of civil disability, which allows me to get state licenses. During that time, I was awaiting for my sentencing. My attorney said to me, hey, listen, Colorado's making a big movement. California is kind of a little bit of a, excuse my language, but a shit show with the legislation. And so we went out to Colorado. So I touched down on Colorado soil around 2009, and I immediately started networking and joined the medical marijuana industry group. We did a lot of lobbying efforts and worked with rulemaking boards, which resulted in the drafting of House Bill 1012-84, which brought state licensing to all the businesses in the state, which is what we wanted. We wanted some type of legitimacy in the eyes of the federal government. Kind of secure our business. And, the group was looked at a little bit of like anytime you're working with local legislators or government, it's kind of like, ooh, that evil group is stepping in on the grassroots movement. But in actuality, we were just trying to secure a spot in this industry and keep the feds out of the state, essentially. Um, and so, yeah, so 20 years from legacy to above ground. I've done everything from my early days in legacy to founding an operation in Colorado, now in Oklahoma. On the back end, we'll probably close up with some of the stuff I'm doing now, but also did a lot of consulting work and still do a lot of consulting work. Um, uh, the most notable for the biggest organization would be Curaleaf when they were Polyatech, about to go public. So helping them in New Jersey and some other projects they had going on around the country. So that's basically my background in brief.
Oh, I
Brief
appreciate
summary.
that. I appreciate that. Like so many of us, yeah, legacy to legit. It's just kind of the name of the game if you've been in cannabis for some time. I guess just something that I found interesting selfishly is when you moved out to Colorado in 2009, you were kind of comparing California, Colorado to New York. How would you say they compared way back in 2009, 2010? I feel like that was kind of still the Wild West with like caregivers growing and selling to dispensaries, but kind of what was your experience kind
It
of
was
comparing?
it really was the Wild West. Those were the backpack days. People walking into shops with backpacks. That's how you sold your product. Um, uh, Everyone in the country recognizes the California and the Colorado market. Even though New York is medical, preparing to go recreational, under the direction of the current mayor, a lot of the people on the street seem to think it's recreational right now, which is pretty cool. But the New York cannabis scene never really opened up its identity to the nation the way California and Colorado did. I mean, some of the New York underground growers producing some of the best stuff in the nation, but the culture was never really front center in the spotlight. Back when High Times was relevant, you would see some articles, some underground operations in New York, but I think a lot of the New York cultivators went unrecognized for a long time. There was no real identity created. And you're starting to see some of it emerge now, especially in Oklahoma. Like there's a group out in Oklahoma. Shout out to the Bodega Boys, and we're gonna get into some of these names and some of the marketing directions a lot of companies are going to gain relevance. But the New York scene is starting to come up quite a bit, and yeah, I hope it continues to thrive. So.
Nice. Yeah, no, we definitely experienced that for sure. People on the West Coast and their knowledge, just their culture around it, the history around it, it definitely is known. Where I would say the East Coast, it's relatively unknown their cannabis culture, or I
Yeah.
guess for me, I'm just not really from there. So interesting to hear that New York City has, such a culture that's just underground. Hopefully it does come to light here. Let's segue into that is a pretty good segue into before we get into kind of branding and the sales side of it. Let's just kind of walk through the pipeline of the cannabis industry. So, kind of you've been around cultivation and production quite some time, and you've seen kind of like everybody in cannabis, there's price compressions going on right now. So it's hard to be profitable in this industry. And so where were some, if you could just speak to it, either we'll take it cultivation and then from there onto like processing and manufacturing production, but where are some holes that people could shore up in order to make their cannabis business more profitable? Whether they're just a solo cultivator or vertically integrated, where are some of these areas that they could that you've seen people miss on profitability?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I'm sure you can imagine unpacking that takes a tremendous amount of time, but I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. So, I see a lot of groups that are struggling for profitability. I would say that's probably the majority in the space. And there's a lot of ways to dissect that. So we'll start with number one, your identity as a company and the market that you are servicing. So finding that identity is very important. So you might have a shop that's small, boutique. They can't afford to scale up and make their money on volume on small margins. And an operator like that needs to have a center focus point on quality and marketing and branding. A lot of the bigger MSOs that you have, like the one dominating Florida right now, they were able to get to to move along for a long time with subpar quality based on footprint and strategic retail locations. But we can see a lot of those groups are struggling for profitability. That comes down to the cultivation space and the efficiency of everything from cultivation all the way to the retail. So when you dissect your indoor cultivation, you have your fixed costs, right? And under the fixed costs, depending on what literature you read, a lot of the time they'll put your fixed costs as your real estate cost, your licensing fees, and then your labor. I don't like to look at labor as a fixed cost. Granted, I understand why it's there, but to me, fixed cost is more of a variable cost. And this comes down to the managing cultivator. Cannabis is like a domino effect. Every industry, there'll be emulations in other industries, but everything in cannabis can have a cascading effect. And right now, even though the curve is increasing on technology, automation, nothing can really replace a well-experienced facility manager. Ultimately, efficiency is, yes, it trickles down from the decisions made from your CFO and CEO and the directions they want to take or the budget they're giving you. But a lot of places lose their profitability with the managing cultivator. Some examples of that would be improper flow and layout. A lot of the places, and I'm shocked. I have some connections to some construction companies and consulting companies in the industry. I get to see new projects being built today. To me, it's understandable when you go in a facility like Colorado, and in Colorado where a facility's already been standing for 10 years, and it was before the technology curve, and they're already built into a certain way, and they can't afford to shut down production for an entire who knows how long, months to almost year to do a complete retrofit. So I get it. You're kind of stuck in that build out, but I see new construction, multi-million-dollar projects where the companies that are in charge of helping design or the lead cultivator is not somebody that really has efficiently worked with their hands every day for 10, 15 years in a space to understand how to design that spot so that when plants are moving out of your veg room to their flowering positions, what's the shortest time from A to B? Where can I cut steps out on transplants? Proper pest management. I mean, you can go over all these different topics on how to properly manage, and that's where the money's lost. 50%, approximately 50% of the cost of a pound comes from labor. But you can effectively reduce that by 20% just through logical, intelligent approaches to workflow and design build out of a space. And so that's one of the things I'm constantly preaching when I see new projects. And I can't stand when I see some of these new build outs and this wasn't properly thought out. You know, they have to walk veg plants all the way across a facility to a flower room and then bring the plant when that's harvested all the way back to another spot where the dry cure room is. The place wasn't logically thought out to create a workflow that keeps a fast-paced movement and no lag time of employees. So it ultimately comes down to that managing cultivator, and it's very hard for a CEO, CFO, people that might not have been in this business for a very long time to identify it. They can't effectively walk into a facility and judge that managing cultivator. They have no example to lead their view on it. So they start putting this labor cost into this fixed, unchangeable place. And then they look towards automation and irrigation design and things like this in order to maybe curb some of that. And in actuality, it really doesn't. It still comes down to the managing cultivator. And I could talk your ear off forever on some of the problems I see specifically that are resulting in a loss of profitability. But that would be probably a more in-depth conversation later time.
Yeah, no, we can definitely have you back on and go in depth kind of in that specific vertical. But yeah, this first one, let's keep it a little bit more high level. Yep. But no, what you're saying is so key too, is people just don't know what good looks like in cannabis because it's a startup industry. I mean, it's not like I can start a construction company and look back at 40 years of best SOP construction management company. You got to find people like yourself, Mark, who have spent 20 years and essentially had to start in the legacy market. But yeah, that's an interesting take just from an accounting perspective, is that if 50% of the cost of your product is in labor, you know, you would almost want to focus 50% of your time on improving that labor and the flow through. But to your point, people don't really want to look at labor. It's almost like, yeah, we have to pay cultivators and bud tenders, it's a sunk cost. It's like,
Yep.
you
And,
can
and
lower
then
that.
and then a lot of people look at it. You just made a statement about like, legacy cultivator, but in reality, it's a double-edged sword no matter which way you go, because a lot of the legacy operators are used to operating smaller basements or smaller warehouses, and they're so stuck in their ways, they can't break out of the box to understand how to operate efficiently in a large scale. So you might get a mind coming from out of some school or somebody with a more business-oriented mind who might see some of these, but they lack the plant science portion of it. And in order to make it really all work seamlessly, you need both. And that's why I shut out before some of the New York cultivators, because a long time ago, we were always looking for these things. Coming from a finance background, a lot of people would see me come in dressed a little different than the norm when I came to Colorado, like, oh, you must be some type of finance business guy. You can't possibly be a cultivator. Well, actually come see the garden. It runs like a sewing machine, very tight. So yeah, and then if you want to segue, we can go into some of the variable cost issues.
Yeah, let's do
One
that. That's a
of
very natural segue.
Yep. So, your variable costs, you have things like your utilities, your nutrients, your growing medium, and all inputs surrounding that. So one of the biggest issues is HVAC. And my team and I, which we'll get into later, are working on some proprietary approaches to solving some of the problems in the industry. So part of profitability, I mean, you could try and cut costs wherever you want to cut them with labor and this and that. But the reality is that, okay, well, what's coming out on the finish end, right? What are your yields per square foot? What's the quality? Is your business structured in such a way that even with the quality, you can demand a higher price point? Sorry, I just lost you on the feed. Sorry about that.
No, I'm still here.
Okay, you can see me fine, right?
Yeah. No,
Yep.
you're good. We're still good.
So now that you're talking about your yields and your returns, and so this is where everything changes. Like I said, you can cut costs in a lot of different ways. I don't want to get too nuanced into the cultivation side, but things like de-leafing grow rooms, right? It's an integral part of achieving yields and quality, but it's extremely labor intensive. And everybody in the industry that I've ever brought in who's not a cultivator, but maybe they came from other business backgrounds, like, well, how can we automate the de-leafing process? And how can you do? We're a very long way from the technology you see on farms of machines, AI plucking tomatoes to do defan leafing on plants. But that is a tremendous labor drain. So that is where it comes back to the managing cultivator. Different cultivars needed at different times, and strategically picking those times, you can get it done in maybe 2 turns or 1 turn instead of 3 turns. And this is where we're back again to the managing cultivator and the practices that are employed. And your next big issue is you have your HVAC. Now, this is a major issue. A lot of the big operators or the big multi-state operators, they are using reheat units in order to efficiently control dehumidification and do it at a cheaper price point, which I guess would be wrapped up in the whole thing with efficiency. However, when you're using these reheat units, the most you're able to drop your temperatures during the finish times is around 70 degrees, maybe 71 degrees. You can't properly create the environment to produce a highly resinous, high yielding product under those conditions. Then you go over to somebody, say like the Jungle Boys, who produce fantastic product, have an incredible business model, and are incredible people who share their knowledge. However, a lot of people are trying to mimic what they're doing using refrigerant fan coils and independent dehues, and the cost of manufacturing is going through the roof. But now for that, you have better parameters of control, which you need under these LED lights now, to create better quality product and higher yields. But your cost of manufacturing went up. So the question there becomes, who's going to come with the innovation to find the happy medium of a unit that can efficiently create the parameters needed for quality and yield? And that's something proprietary that we're working on. And then now you have irrigation design and setup, very costly, but necessary to reduce labor costs. In the irrigation design, there are a lot of holes Everyone's using sterile systems using hypochlorous acid. And this is creating a good looking product, but terpene profiles are becoming reduced. Um, it, and that segues into your extraction lab. When you talk about profitability, it's also all your angles of profits. We know now, when I came out to Colorado, we just wanted to be a manufacturer. I had no interest in dealing with extraction or dealing with retail operations. And Matt Cook, who is a director of the medical program out here, said, hey, listen, this vertical program is going to end up saving you guys in the long run. And he was right, because I think now, probably as good as any operator, that when the state allowed, wholesale licenses and things like that, the margins on wholesale plummeted. You have to have your retail distribution set up in order to get a better margin on your product, because the wholesale market's been decimated. But back to the point, irrigation design, HVAC, and basically it's a cascading effect with a bunch of variables. When you talk about declining prices in the market, yeah, it's extremely hard right now. We have inflation. The cost per pound is going up based on inflation. Labor force is difficult right now, and the prices of cannabis are plummeting. It's kind of mind-boggling when you look at an industry where you look at the projected growth. I forgot the exact numbers, but it's staggering. The amount of growth projected in the industry and money coming into the industry, yet the prices per pound are declining and businesses are struggling for profitability. It's kind of like, how could this be in such a booming industry? But yeah, those money holes are gone. And it basically, to me, it revolves around the managing cultivator and the support he receives from owners and people above him in the chain.
I appreciate the insight. Because it takes a whole team to be successful in cannabis, and we're in the business of profit. So success for a cannabis business is profit. I mean, I know there's a lot of other ways to be successful, but for this conversation, we're talking about profit. And to your point, it takes a whole team with different skill sets that can communicate between each other. Because like you brought up, like a prime example, I live in Wisconsin, so we don't have a medical program. So there's a lot of home growers still, and they don't all just transfer their knowledge well at scale. I mean, they have a very set way that they're doing it. And so trying to find cultivators with experience at scale, definitely hard. And then trying to come in from the finance side and just even manufacturing side, and just understanding the science of the plant, that it's a living plant that degrades over time a lot faster than some of the other products. And so just understanding that the quality will be affected by the layout of the shop and all of this stuff, and just that never ending balancing act of quality versus yield. We're on the finance side. So it's like, we're always looking at the numbers of yes, we could spend more on this, but how do we guarantee we're going to be able to sell it more for this, and trying to figure that out. It never ends.
And I'll give you some examples without telling you everything, because that would make I wouldn't devalue our services that much, but I'll give you an example. And this is very just layman cultivation based, but it affects big time the bottom line of some of your viewers who are operating businesses or looking at the finance. Standard in the industry, right? Take away machine trimming, because the industry is knowing now a lot of them are moving away from machines. It needs to go back to hand trimming, which is very expensive. It can be up to $100 a pound to trim a pound of cannabis. But look at this. You got plant hanging. They go in for harvest day. They cut down that plant. They hang dry it. Then either they de-leaf it before it gets hung, or they de-leaf it while it's coming down. And then it goes to somebody who clips those buds into a bin. Then it goes to somebody else who takes those buds out of the bin, hand trims those, puts them back into a bin, and then goes back to packaging. Doesn't that sound a little ridiculous that it has to touch that many hands along the way? Shouldn't it come off the line, get processed right off the stem, and go forward right into packaging? Wouldn't that make more sense? No one in the industry is doing that, and they're doubling up their labor on the harvest side. And I'm telling you, all the operators are doing it the same way. And it's just these illogical approaches. And that's why the legacy isn't going to buy your way into any type of, like we talked before, right? You could bring in bad habits from legacy. That's one of them. But the way I always approach things, and my partners in an early time, was when we were underground, we started off large. I mean, large for what underground was. We were large, and we had nobody because we couldn't bring people in. So we had to sit there and look at this like, how are we going to take down 100 lights with 2 people? How are we going to do it? And so we had to figure out the most efficient, fastest ways to do it. And that led to profitability and reduced labor costs by isolating those and figuring out how to do that. But that's just like one small example of a much bigger picture in facilities where a lot of these operators are losing on profitability. Tremendous labor costs, and it doesn't need to be there.
Right. And it's all about, because it is that living product of getting, harvest to timeout with drying, with curing, with packaging, and kind of just the different ways to go through that. But like most things, necessity drives innovation. And so I feel like cannabis is very much still in its innovative years. There's a lot of stuff that has been innovative. We definitely stand on the shoulders of giants. Like growing, selling, doing cannabis business is a lot easier in 2023 than in 2013, but still has quite a long way to go. So let's segue a little bit, kind of understanding a little bit of the direct costs, fluctuating variable costs of cultivation. I would like to go all the way down the supply chain, but let's just kind of segue a little bit. We can do that on a different episode, but into just the cycles of cannabis. So right now, and I kind of think of just business in general in 3 to 5 year seasons. So looking back at the last 5 years, as we all know in cannabis right now, capital, deployment of equity capital is plummeted. Same with debt capital, plummeted. There's price contractions right now, but just having been in cannabis for 15 years, like even I've seen the price contractions and expansions of the market. But obviously you've been a lot deeper into cannabis for a much longer time at a bigger scale. So could you just talk a little bit about the cycle we're currently in and kind of the past cycles you've seen, and I guess where you think the future is going to be?
Okay. Yeah, and you nailed it right on the head, the 3 to 5 year cycles. Last night in preparation for this conversation, I sat down and really I preach the same thing when I talk to people about the cycles, but I never really sat down and wrote it out and looked at it from a straight angle. And around 2009, 2010 coming out, when House Bill 1284 came out and we founded our businesses, things were going pretty smooth. They were competitive. But then around 2013, 14, you saw the price wars, right? So right there, you were about your 3 to 4 year cycle, as you had mentioned. And then prices came back up. And then we hit 2018, 19. Like you said, another crash down. We came out into COVID era with price hikes. I mean, and that was really bad for the industry. I mean, our businesses were hitting record numbers during COVID, but it was all artificial injections of capital and people staying home. And a big problem was a lot of businesses based their expansions based off of that influx of capital coming into COVID. And so they got caught out there as soon as the market or all that federal injection pulled back, and everybody was overproducing. And I'm sure you saw a lot of that. That's basically a story of what happened, I know, out here in Colorado. Based on sales, everybody expanded only to fall flat on their face with their expansions. And then now you're going into 2022, 2023, where we saw another crash in prices, and we're starting to see an uptick now. I mean, because the legacy black market and the above ground market, they intersect. As much as we would like it not to, it's inevitable. They intersect. The business ebbs and flows from one side to the other, depending on tax structures, quality that can be found in the shops. You have all these shifts that happen. And where we're at now, at this exact moment, we're seeing wholesale prices slightly on the uptick, but not very much to make an enormous difference. And I don't foresee the future. I hear a lot of people talking about how quality will eventually reign supreme, and I hope to believe that, and I do believe that. However, I don't think if we do face recession, I don't think it's going to be like the underground days in 2009, where when there was more liquidity available on the streets to consume cannabis. So I do think we will continue to see contraction, and I do think that there will be stabilization, and it's going to come down to quality and building your brand. And I know that some of the bigger minds at the MSOs, while they haven't exactly paved the way to profitability, I think that you can see the moves they're making, like you have a True Leaf acquiring 710 Labs, Alien Labs. They're looking to some of these guys that came from the legacy market to build that connection with the customer and also bring quality to the table. Unfortunately, they're going to find out that the brand itself will not support that, and it will come back down to the operators under the brand, still leading them to the path of connection with the consumers and the quality to put on the shelf. So moving forward, I think what we're seeing is huge divergences in price. You hear a lot of people talking about price drops, and that's the majority of what we're seeing even down on the retail end is price contraction. However, you see some of those strong brands that have a grassroots connection to the community that are holding ground on their prices, and in some cases, even expanding in this current market. So that connection to the customer, efficient production and production of quality flower is obviously what is going, I think, to propel these businesses to the future of profitability. But we need to realize some innovations on the mechanical side in order to get there with the profitability, because I don't think the consumer market's going to want to pay more to help get us there. So,
Right. Because it's like, if I can buy an eighth of the same quality for one's more expensive than the other, like, unless there's a brand behind it or some cause, like, I'm like most logical buyers just going to buy the same quality for less. But that is where the brand kind of comes in, and not only just having a brand of authority that you've been around and of quality, but I mean, it's almost getting to the point too where it's like you need to have a story as well with your brand. There needs to be ethics. Back when I left corporate, ESG was the talk of the town: environmental, social, governance. Like, what is your company actually doing to make the world a better place? You know, we had quantified it on Wall Street and we were like pushing towards it because it affected our stock price. I think cannabis is trending towards that way very quickly just because of the grassroots nature of it. It's always been a plant for the people that makes the world a better place. And so having a brand that not only is of quality and consistency, you could do kind of need to have a story and be giving back, where it's, at first, cannabis was such a small industry, you know, nobody really thought about that too much, but I can see that also really propelling the brand forward. And to your point, I find it interesting too, like the consolidation that's happening, because I feel like it's also going to mirror the big beer cycle, where when, you know, 20 years ago, it was Anheuser-Busch, Budweiser, Coors Light. There's only a handful of breweries. And then within the last 10 years, I was living in Colorado in 2010 and just seeing all the microbreweries, craft breweries just explode in the neighborhoods. And now moving back to Milwaukee, I see it even here, where Milwaukee, like, it's Miller is produced here and kind of headquartered, but the small microbrews have taken over because people do appreciate kind of quality and a nuanced story. How do you see the consolidation piece of cannabis playing out, as far as, you know, cultivators are struggling, better cultivators are seeing the opportunities and purchasing up these smaller assets in order to make them more profitable in the future? Do you think that will continue? How much longer? What is your take on the consolidation versus kind of independent small boutique cannabis companies?
Yeah, I do. I think that consolidation will continue. You know, our first couple of years out here in Colorado, when we had founded Fox Street Cannabis, we saw a 60% consolidation rate after the first couple of years. It was tremendous. A lot of that was also because they changed rules. They went from allowing felons to own and operate businesses. They took that right away about 3 years into all the rulemaking, which forced a lot of people out of the industry. It was very sad. A lot of people, including myself, put our entire lives on the line. And then, you know, they came in, law enforcement lobbyists couldn't win a single issue, and then they poked it out. They pushed out the felons who had created the whole industry. But that was the first major consolidation, and I'm sure the consolidations will continue happening. And you know, during bad times, you see less of them, I feel like, which to me is odd, because I feel like that's more the opportunity to jump in and scoop them up. Usually they wait till the markets are rebounding. You start seeing more activity. At least I have been. But yeah, I think it's going to be a road that continues to happen. I think a lot of the bigger operators, like you see at True Leaf, they're losing market share to groups like Jungle Boys. You got a team that's coming in with good product, good connection to the consumers that are about the culture, and they're coming in and just taking away the market share of some of these MSOs who dominated the footprints of certain states. So I think you're going to see more acquisitions, mergers, consolidations amongst these brands. But I think that one of the biggest problems a lot of these big operators who are rolling up these companies is going to find over the next couple of years is maintaining the brand and the quality, maintaining what they purchased is going to be very difficult for them. And you see that a lot with like the Cookies brand, as awesome as those guys are and their business model is. And they've already paved their way. They're already too deep rooted, I feel like, to pull back anytime soon. However, they contract their genetics to different growers, and you see like one in Oklahoma City, their Cookies location shut down, and people are slowly moving away from the brand because they don't have quality control in their processes like a Jungle Boys does. You know, so I think that's going to be a big part of moving forward in the future are these consolidations, and I think these bigger companies are going to scramble to find their identity and to connect with the consumers as they become more educated, which is going to take time.
Okay. I have nuanced kind of rephrasing of that question, just because I do get a lot of this conversation about, MSOs versus smaller companies. There is almost, I'm sure you can feel it, there's almost like animosity between bigger companies and smaller companies.
Yes.
I come from Wall Street, so I come from big business, and I assume small to medium size operators want to become medium to large size operators. So let's just use the Jungle Boys as an example, taking on Curaleaf down in Florida. Like, how would you say some of these smaller boutique grows can compete with these larger MSOs or larger publicly traded companies that they, just for simplistic understanding, they have pretty much endless resources, endless cash. Whereas these smaller operators are bootstrapping, they have finite resources. Just on a high level, I know we can't solve this on this call, but like, what are some pros and tips you would give these smaller operators to compete with some of these larger, more financially backed operators?
Don't let anyone tell you or your own mind trick you that every single little detail in that facility doesn't matter. And the MSOs could have all the money they want, and maybe they could play the waiting game, but the reality is you can only bleed for so long, right? And we saw that in Canada. Yeah, we saw that in Canada, and there wasn't enough money in the markets of whole to, I think, prop them through that wave of just taking losses until everyone else is wiped out. It didn't work for them. Will it work here? I don't know, but I can tell you that when I hear an MSO talk about the silver lining for me is that, yeah, competing against big money is always going to be hard, and potentially you're fighting a battle already sitting on the losing end of the stick. However, the silver lining that I find in it when I hear about MSOs, endless resources and all this is I've already been involved with one and watched how money was being spent. And all they do is dig themselves further away from profitability because they do not look at the details that are going on. They are not really doing they think they are by having maybe engineers come in, evaluate something and come up with all these reports on what will be profitable, but they do not understand. They're too disconnected. They do not understand what's going on in that grow. So every day, my advice to small operators would be every day you go in there in your mind with, I can be doing this more efficient. Don't do one single process and think you've landed on it, because there's always a way to squeeze more efficiency out of the place. And the whole quantity versus quantity thing is a myth. When you've maximized that plant to full potential, you should be able to yield the highest you ever have with the best quality you've ever had. And do not take post-processing for granted. 40% of quality is lost in post-processing. So you can have some of the most unbelievable product out there, and by the time you go through your processing, 8 out of 10 times, it has to go to decreased market value because of how you let it come out of your processing.
Man, those are some good nuggets. I like that. Even especially just people can take away the importance of just post-processing. Because I've seen it on endless grows. It looks so beautiful out in the field, even looks beautiful hanging in its drying phase, but like somewhere along the line, either in the curing or the packaging or the trimming, something went sideways, and you're like, well, that is now a B or C bud, and that's no longer an A.
Every time. I'm sure you've been around a lot of new people in cannabis. I know my partners in my new project in Altai that you see behind me.
Mhm.
Unbelievable people too, by the way. I couldn't ask for a greater set of partners. And in this industry, a lot of people who are willing to take a lot of risks coming into this industry. So you get some pretty out there personalities.
Yeah.
Partnerships can be hard in this business, and I'm very fortunate for the people I'm currently surrounded by. I could tell you we have a dynamic team of great people. But when we first went facility touring with them, it's always interesting for me to see when they're looking at the plants, like, oh my God, this looks incredible. And then they get to the curing room, and then they get to the retail front, and then they're like, what the hell happened to this? You
Yeah.
know? so,
It's
so
planned. Oh
yep.
man, not everybody knows it.
So I would say take a lot of notes, understand your cultivars, understand where to put the labor in and when. Look to reduce the labor on these jobs and this and each step that you're doing. See how you can each project or each task rather. Um, Keep further dissecting it. If a task
Yeah.
takes 3 processes, try and find an innovative approach to bring it down to 2. You'll effectively lower your labor on that task by a third. And when you're stepping into these new build outs, you could call us. However, be wary of a lot of these groups doing design build outs who are not in the trenches and the weeds working every day. You know, like myself, my hands are in the dirt every single day. I'm in there. Listen to your employees. Listen to the feedback. Too many of these owner operators are disconnected, really disconnected from what's going
I
on in
would,
the
I would
cultivation
agree.
centers.
I mean, as a CFO, we chat with business owner groups and CEOs and presidents, and it is always kind of like there's always the ownership group, the money man, but then there's also like the who's the actual driving this car. And it's is usually on the cultivation side, or if it's retail specific, it's the retail store manager that actually knows how to like increase basket size. Because we'll see it in cannabis where people very successful in a non-cannabis industry come into cannabis,
Every
but they
time.
don't have any cultivation experience, no retail experience, and so it's like, well, you should probably partner with somebody that has that experience because it's business fundamentals. And so if you control your costs well, you can actually create a profitable entity. If it's profitable, it can kind of run, forever as long as it doesn't run out of cash. And so
Yep.
I appreciate your insight because that should give a lot of people hope. It's, because I come from larger companies too, and just to see the amount of waste that
Yeah.
goes on at these corporate levels, whether it's
Yep.
publicly traded cannabis companies or not, they will spend tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that actually don't drive them towards profitability because of the disconnect of like who's deploying the capital and who's actually doing the work. There's such a large disconnect that if it's not a good team with good communications, like as we've seen with
Yep.
these large publicly traded companies, they're losing money every quarter, hand over fist, has not really improved the last few quarters. And I like how you brought
Yep.
up Canada, where if they don't get something figured out or dialed in or make a trend towards profitability, you can't bleed forever. That's also how business fundamentals work. As you run out of cash, you will at some point run out of business. Like you can't raise more funds. But anyways, I could talk about this all day, Mark. This was
Yeah.
actually a really enjoyable podcast. I think we should try and come on again here in a few months. But just let everybody know kind of what you've been up to, where they can find you. If they have any questions, if you're willing, provide your connection information.
Okay. And about that, coming back on the podcast, I think it would be great if you wanted to touch more into the extraction side, because when we're
Okay.
talking about profitability in cannabis, that's what's so exciting about my newest project. Is Altai Legacy Craft, and we're out in Oklahoma. Is Oklahoma a saturated market? Yes. Are we coming at the industry from a different angle? Absolutely. Do we have our eyes on Texas, where we're looking at power problems, the grid? I don't know if Texas, when it goes fully legal, will be able to support the level of infrastructure that would be required to indoor grow. And so we are moving some of our efforts to extraction, outdoor cultivation, with profitability and margins at the forefront, on top of quality product and increased terpene extraction for the consumer, stuff that's on the consumer side that we do, because besides a business, we are actually passionate and love what we do and had a lifetime in cannabis, and that is our number one, and that's our number one driver is always the end consumer. But so right now I'm in Oklahoma. I have a wonderful team. We're getting ready to launch here in a few months in the state. It's all extractions. We're doing all live resin products, live resin disposable pens, live resin diamonds specifically. We have, 20 years in this business. I've met a lot of extractors, and I truly believe we have one, not if not one of the most talented extractors in the state. And I think it would be great if you wanted to touch on some of the areas of extraction, because it's a very big thing. You should probably have them on at some point. I'd be happy to make that introduction.
I
So
appreciate it.
yeah, as far as Colorado operations, I've kind of segued out of that full bore into Altai in Oklahoma. I have a consulting business, myfirefinder.com, where I can be reached, and I'm kind of merging that with Altai right now as we're looking at helping other businesses gain profitability, maybe move some of their indoor operations to some other outdoor and extraction operations. I think a lot of people would be, a lot of operators would be pleased to see the profitability margins in comparison. But I do think you need almost everything to support a brand, right? You have to have a little bit of everything to fully support a brand and get that brand recognition. Have to have some quality flower, have to have quality extractions. They all work synergistically.
No, they definitely do. And it's like getting people to get over the idea of like, just if like cultivators, because I come from that space. It's like, yes, you can just sell the flower, but if you extract it and incur a few more costs to refine it and get it to a little bit further down the line, your profit margins do look a lot healthier. But it's just, again, it's that vertical integration. We're going from just small, like this is all I do is cultivate. Now it's like, okay, now we're going to bring in extraction and processing and manufacturing.
Yep.
But to your point, it's
Yep.
needed.
Yep.
That's
And so
awesome.
we've segued a lot of operations. So we're doing fresh frozen only, fresh frozen hydrocarbon live extraction.
Nice.
Yep. And so that's what's going on now.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, Mark. This was a pleasure. And this will be posted shortly. So I'm going to stop recording here. Stop.